Hello, everyone, and again, welcome to Chapter 10 of our Business 670 course, the last chapter in this course. And our opening case today really talks about Citigroup, and that was an interesting case when you think about the financial repercussions that occurred during the Great Recession back in 2006, 7, and 8. And this is a classic example of one of those companies that their reputation, their brand name, their expertise, and their capital had enabled them to expand both its products and its geographic scope. And as we look into this case, what we see is that the overestimates of some of the synergies that they had led them to to diversify into activities that strayed away from its key strengths in consumer retailing banking. And as it became increasingly more diversified, it became difficult for managers to provide adequate oversight within the organizations. Problems then pursued, including conflicts of interest, underestimates of the risk of its assets grew without even being detected, which led to a $45 billion buyout by the United States government. And they were fearful that the too big to fail term got coined during that time, that there was just fear running amongst the economists and the government that if we allowed this particular bank to fail, it would have far-reaching economic impacts to more banks. So interesting case. And again, the reason why strategy is so vitally important. As we think about this particular chapter, we're going to be looking at some of the challenges as well as some of the opportunities that exist by creating corporate level strategies, whether of being related or unrelated diversification. We're going to take a look at some of the different multi-business models between the related and unrelated diversification. And we're going to be looking at 3 different ways a company can implement a diversification strategy, whether through internal new ventures, acquisitions, and joint ventures. And our learning objectives goes hand in hand with that as we look at the related and unrelated diversification. 5 primary ways in which diversification can increase a company's profitability, what type of conditions that leads managers to pursue such a strategy. And we'll be talking about the 3 different methods again of internal new venturing, acquisitions, and joint ventures. So we start on page 322 of our text, and we're talking about the first topic of being diversification. And diversification is the process of when a company enters into new industries distinct from their core or original industry, where they want to do that to make new kinds of products that can be sold profitably to customers in these new industries. And this type of multi-business model is based on diversification, which is aimed at finding ways to use the company's existing competencies to make products, hopefully, that are highly valued by customers in this new industry that it is planning on entering. And a diversified company is one that makes and sells such products into a more different or distinct industry. A diversification strategy hopefully will enable a company or its individual business units to perform one or more of its value chain functions. And certainly we know that those value chain functions is the lower cost, allows for differentiation and gives the company pricing options, and it also helps the companies to manage industry rivalry in order to increase profitability. As managers of most companies often consider diversification when they're generating free cash flow. And cash is in excess is what typically funds new investments in the company's current business and meet existing debt obligations and commitments. Yet for diversification to be value creating, a company has got to ensure they have a good return on investing free cash flow to pursue any diversification opportunities. That is, when the future return on its invested capital or return on invested capital, ROIC, that must exceed what the value the shareholders would reap by returning the cash to them. And typically there's 5 ways in which a company is pursuing a multi-business model based on diversification to increase their company profitability. And when they do that, strategic managers are looking at these 5 ways. First one being, how do we go about transferring competencies between business units in different industries? So they have to transfer those competencies. Number 2 is they have to leverage those competencies to create business units in new industries. Number 3, they got to share the resources between business units so that they can realize synergies or economics of scope. Another way, certainly number 4, is using product bundling. And number 5 deals with general organizational competencies that increase the performance of a company's business units. So let's take a few moments and look at each one of these individually. So the first one on page 323 deals with transferring competencies, and this involves taking a distinctive competency that's developed by a business unit in one industry and implanting it in a business unit operating in another industry. Some companies that have based their diversification strategy on transferring competencies, they typically will do this in one or more of their existing distinctive competencies in a value chain activity to significantly strengthen their business model of the acquired business or company. So they're looking for this term called commonality. And the companies that base their diversification on transferring these companies tend to acquire businesses related to existing business activities because of those commonalities that is going to exist. And a commonality is some kind of skill or attribute that is shared between 2 or more business units, which allows both businesses to operate more effectively and efficiently, thereby creating value for customers. Creating value for customers hopefully leads to more sales. More sales leads to more profit. In general, as they transfer, they're looking for doing that to increase profitability. And when they're doing that, they're looking at lowering the cost structure of one of the diversified companies and enabling one or more of its business units to better differentiate their products. So commonality and transferring competencies is a significant strategic advantage. Okay, we talked about this here already. Okay, increasing profitability, looking at lowering the cost, and they also want to differentiate their products in such a way that it becomes a competitive advantage. And when they have this strategic value, is really what it's called. When those competencies are being able to be transferred, it really gives it a real strategic value that is being offered between different organizations and between the different business units within the company so they can increase its profitability. Oh, too fast. Okay, figure 10.1 is an example that in our textbook that shows the transfers of these competencies. In this particular example of Philip Morris, where they're doing that transfer of competencies at the marketing and sales level. So it's just how a company can actually go about utilizing the expertise from other industries to develop their own expertise. In figure 10.1. And when they're leveraging these competencies, this was number 2, leveraging the competencies to create a new business over on page 324. And they can leverage these competencies by developing a new business in a different industry. And a company that has a multi-business model, it's based on the premise that a set of these distinctive competencies or the source of a company's competitive advantage in one industry may be applied to create a differentiation or a cost competitive advantage for a new business unit or division in a different industry. So I'm taking what I have that is a distinctive competency, and we're seeing from a strategic initiative, can I take this distinctive competency and leverage it into a new industry where we can make more money for the corporation, or again, increase our profitability. And then we talk about number 3, which deals with sharing resources and capabilities on page 325. And this is where 2 or more business units that operate in different industries can increase a diversified company's profitability when they share resources and capabilities, resulting in economies of scope or synergies. And economies of scope will arise when 1 or more of a diversified company's business units are able to realize cost savings or differentiation synergies because they can move more effectively, they can pool their resources, they can share those resources, they can utilize those resources or capabilities, and that may, as we know, include skilled people, its equipment, its manufacturing facilities, its distribution networks, its advertising campaigns, its research and development laboratories. So it's using all of those resources where they can share it across different business units. And when they do that, hopefully they're going to realize some cost reductions in 2 major areas. And the first one being when they can share resources or capabilities across business unit, it lowers their cost structure when that's compared to when they only operate in one industry. And when they only operate in one industry, that they bear the full cost of developing resources and capabilities instead of sharing that cost structure. Number 2, diversification to attain economies of scope is possible when there are significant commonalities between 1 or more of the value chain functions in a company's different business units or division that results in such synergies that again leads to increased profitability. And over on page 326, figure 10.2 is an example of Procter & Gamble and how they're sharing their research and development as well as their marketing and sales. Just an example that we see in our textbook to help reinforce this concept. So the other area was number 4, dealing with product bundling on page 326. And this is where a company is looking for new ways to differentiate products and how they can enter into industries that provide customers with new products that are connected or related to their existing products, almost like complementary product offerings they have to go along with their main products. And when they're able to do this, this allows a company to expand its range of products that it produces so that it will be able to satisfy the ever-changing customer needs and demands. And those needs and demands typically look for a complete package of related products. And it's also important to note that product bundling often does not require joint ownership. For product bundling to serve as a justification for diversification, there must be a strong need for coordination between the producers of the different products where they can overcome their ever-changing market conditions. The next one deals with the utilization of organizational competencies over on page 327. And generally, organizational competency transcend individual functions or business units that are at the top level of the multi-business company. And typically, a general organizational competencies are the result in the skills of a company's top managers and functional experts. And we see there's 3 types of general organizational competencies that help a company increase its performance and profitability. And that's through entrepreneurial capabilities, organizational design capabilities, and strategic capabilities. So let's look at each one of those momentarily as well, if we could. with the first one being the entrepreneurial capabilities on page 327. And a company that generates significant cash flow can take advantage of its entrepreneurial spirit if the managers are able to identify new opportunities and act on them to create a stream of new and improved products in its industry or in new industries. Such a company is able to do this to promote entrepreneurship because it has organizational culture that stimulates managers to act entrepreneurially. And it's important to note that to promote entrepreneurship, a company must do several things. One of those is to encourage managers to take risks. Now, they got to be calculated and acceptable risks, but nonetheless, they got to be willing to take risks. I want to give managers the time and resources to pursue novel ideas. They don't want to punish managers when a new idea fails, and they want to make sure that the company's free cash flow is not wasted in pursuing too many risky new ventures that have a low probability of success or a low probability of generating a profitable return on investment. So having an entrepreneurial spirit in today's organizations, no matter how old they are, is absolutely paramount. And if you notice that a new employee coming to your organization within 6 months, typically, within 6 months, that employee will be so ingrained into the culture that if they had any entrepreneurial spirit left in them, we typically will take it away from them. So even in an entrenched organization today, entrepreneurship is needed in every organization. But these were the activities that a company that wants to promote entrepreneurship must do. And if you think about Apple and some of the high technological industries that we see, you can see where having this entrepreneurial spirit is absolutely paramount. Equally important if you look over in the space industry, if you think about SpaceX, the new startup company that's been launching rockets and now have created the technology and the ability to re-land and reuse rockets. So this entrepreneurial capability is absolutely paramount as we move forward in today's global, highly technical environment that we live in. Number 2 deals with the capabilities within the organization on page 328. And it talks about organizational design skills, which are the result of a manager's ability to create a structure, a culture, and control systems that motivate and coordinate employees and their performance so that they have the opportunity to perform at high levels. And this type of organizational design is certainly a major factor that has the opportunity to influence a company's entrepreneurial capabilities. And it's also important, it also can be an important detriment of a company's ability to create functional competencies that could give it a competitive advantage if the management team does not embrace entrepreneurship. So an effective organizational structure and controls create incentives that encourages business units, divisional managers, hopefully to maximize the efficiency and effectiveness of their units. To profit from pursuing the corporate level strategy of diversification, then, a company must be able to continuously manage and continuously change its structure and culture as it motivates and coordinates its employees to work at a higher level as they go about developing the resources and the capabilities which its competitive advantage depends. The ever-present need to align a company structure with its strategy is a complex task. It's never-ending task, and top managers who do this well have developed those skills to which to recognize, to motivate, and in essence, get out of the way of the employees so that they can fulfill at their maximum potential. And number 3 in this particular discussion deals with superior strategic management capabilities over on page 328. And for a diversification strategy to increase its profitability, then a company's top managers must possess that hard to define governance skills that are required to manage different business units in a way that each business unit performs better than they would have if they were independent companies. These type of governance skills are rare and a very valuable capability of the senior management team possesses that. And it's important to note that this governance skill in a diversified company is one of those key components, is that that management team has the ability to diagnose the underlying source of problems of a poorly performing business unit or company, then understand how they need to proceed to correct or solve those problems. This might involve recommending new strategies to existing top management, or knowing when to replace them with a new management team that is better to fix the problems. And related to this strategic management skill, ability of top managers of a diversified company is to identify inefficient and poorly performing or managed companies in the industries that they acquire and restructure them, hopefully to improve their performance. Typically, this is known as a turnaround strategy over on page 330. And there are several ways in which they go about doing a turnaround strategy to improve the performance of the company that was just recently acquired. A few of those are, let me get to the slide. A few of those are to improve that performance is that the top manager of the acquired company are replaced with a more aggressive top management team. That new top management team could potentially sell off expensive assets, terminate managers and employees to reduce the cost structure, downsizing. That new management team should be working to devise new strategies to improve the performance of the operations of the businesses that they acquired, as it goes about improving its efficiency, its quality, its innovativeness, as well as its customer responsiveness. In order to motivate the new top management team and the other employees of the acquired company, they may implement new goals, company-wide pay for performance bonus schemes, which is linked to profitability, as well as rewarding employees at all levels for their hard work. They may also go about establishing stretch goals for employees at all levels of the organization. These stretch goals are typically very challenging, very hard to obtain, and it forces employees at all levels to improve the company's efficiency and effectiveness. And lastly, the members of the new management team should clearly understand that if they fail to increase their division's performance and meet the stretch goals in an agreed amount of time, then they themselves may be replaced. So that you have to recognize that in this ever-changing environment in which we operate in today. Let's talk about, there's two types of related diversification starting on page 331 we want to cover. And this is related diversification and unrelated diversification. And they can be distinguished by how they attempt to realize the profit-enhancing benefits of diversification. So first, let's talk about related diversification, which is a corporate level strategy based on the goal of establishing a business establishing a business unit or a new division in the industry that is directly related to the company's 6 existing business units by some form of commonality or linkage between the value chain functions of the existing and the new business units. And this goal of this strategy is to obtain the benefits from transferring such competencies, leveraging those competencies, sharing resources, and up to and including bundling of its products. So this type of multi-business model is related diversification is based on taking the advantage of strong technological, manufacturing, marketing, sales commonalities between the new and existing business units so that they can be successful. They may require them to be modified or tweaked to increase the company's competitive advantage of one or more of its business units. And we see that kind of in that example of United Technologies over on page 329. Now, figure 10.3 on page 333 illustrates the commonality or linkages that's possible among the different functions of the three business units or divisions. With one or more advantage of related diversification is that it also allows a company to use any general organizational competency it possesses to increase the overall performance of all of its different industries. So it's really about what are the distinctive competencies of the organization that makes it successful. So now let's talk about unrelated diversification. And unrelated diversification is a corporate level strategy whereby firms own unrelated businesses in an attempt to increase their value as they pursue a internal capital or internal market. And the use of this general organizational competency is paramount. And some companies who pursue this type of strategy are often called conglomerates. And this is where a business unit operates in many diverse industries. And they have this term called an internal capital market, which refers to a situation whereby a corporate headquarters assesses the performance of the business units and then allocates money across them. Cash is generated by the units that are profitable, but may have poor investment opportunities within that business, so they use that cash to cross-subsidize businesses that need cash, but yet have a strong promise for long-term profitability. Some of the benefits associated with this type of strategy certainly deals with the internal capital market or limited, efficiency of the external capital market. The benefits of an internal capital market are limited, so therefore they're looking at the external market potential. And if the external capital market were perfectly efficient, managers could not create additional value by cross-subsidizing with internal cash. An internal capital market is in essence a arbitrage strategy where managers can make money by making better investment decisions within the firm in the external capital market. And when a business manager has information on the external market, then hopefully they can make those type of decisions that is proportional to the efficiency or of the external market capital. And when companies go about pursuing such a strategy, they have no intention typically of transferring or leveraging competencies between business units or sharing resources other than cash and general organizational competencies. And if the strategic managers of conglomerates have the special skill needed to manage companies in diverse industries, this strategy can also result in superior performance, but sometimes they do not have that. And as we see here, some of the reasons for efficiency of capital markets here in our country, if you think about the Security Exchange Commission in the reporting requirements that they mandated on all businesses, the number of research analysts, how large is the investment community, what's the communication systems and contractual law, which also impacts a conglomerate as well. So some of the disadvantages of a diversification over on page 333, 3 principal reasons why a business model based on diversification may lead to a loss of its competitive advantage: changes in the industry, over time that occurs and the company not paying attention. Number two being they pursued a diversification strategy for the wrong reasons. And number three, they did an excessive diversification that resulted in increasing bureaucratic costs. So let's look at three of these moments here for a few moments. So the first one deals with the changes in the industry or the company, and as they pursue this type of diversification strategy, top managers must have the ability to recognize profitable opportunities as they'd have a desire to enter new industries, as well as the foresight to implement the strategies necessary to make such a diversification profitable. And as we know, over time, a management team may change as a result of choice or by being forced out. But in either case, oftentimes that management team will change. And when that management team changes, when that manager who possesses this hard to find skills leave, they often take those visions with them. And as the new company leaders come in, they may lack the competency or commitment necessary to pursue the diversification over time. Thus, this cost structure, diversified company increases, and it may eliminate any strategy that may have been gained, any gains that may have been produced from such a strategy. Equally important, as the environment often changes rapidly and unpredictably over time, new technology may come into bear, which kind of now may change the industry boundaries. What was once profitable could destroy the source of the company's competitive advantage. And when a major technological change occurs in a company's core business, the benefits that it previously achieved from transferring or leveraging such distinctive competencies may disappear. So let's look at number two, diversification for the wrong reasons, over on page 334. When a manager decides to pursue diversification, they got to have a clear vision of how they're going to enter into that new business and how they're going to create new products that provide more value for customers as they go about trying to increase their profitability. And over time, they'll see that diversification strategy may result in failing or falling profitability, but managers often refuse to recognize that their strategy is failing. So they may be going into it for a wrong reason. Another widely used justification for diversification was that the strategy would allow the company to obtain the benefits of risk pooling. And this idea behind risk pooling is often that a company can reduce its risk of its revenues and profits rising and falling if it acquires and operates companies in several industries that have different business cycles. But yet sometimes they fail to ignore two significant facts. Number one, that stockholders can eliminate the risk inherent to holding the individual stock by divesting their own portfolios, and they can do so much to lower the cost that a company can. And number two, some researchers suggest that corporate diversification is not an effective way to pool risk because the business cycles of different industries are inherently difficult to predict. So it is very likely that a diversified company will find that an economic downturn affects all of its business units simultaneously. Think about the 2006, 7, and 8 recession we just came out of. And when this happens, the company's profitability has the potential to plunge. And when a company or business finds its core business in trouble, another mistaken justification for diversification is that the enter into new industries will rescue the core business and lead to long-term growth and profitability. But yet, when a company is desperate, they will also diversify for growth alone rather than to gain any well thought out strategic advantage. In fact, it has been indicated that too much diversification may reduce rather than improve a company's profitability. And finally, number 3, with this topic of limits and disadvantages of diversification, number 3 was the bureaucratic cost. A major reason that why diversification fails to produce profitability is this term called bureaucratic cost, or the benefits created by the strategy when a company makes and sells a wider range of products is just not there. This bureaucratic cost, or costs that are associated with solving the transaction difficulties that may arise between a company's business units and between units and corporate headquarters, as that company attempts to obtain the benefits from transferring, sharing, and leveraging its competencies. This may also include costs associated with using general organizational competencies to solve managerial and functional inefficiencies. This type of bureaucratic cost in a diversified organization is a function that has typically been identified by 2 factors, and that's the number of business units in a company's portfolio and the degree to which the coordination is required between the 2 different business units to realize the advantage of diversification. So let's look at the number of businesses first. Over on page 335. The greater the number of business units in a company's portfolio, the more difficult corporate managers are going to find it to remain informed about the complexities of each business unit. And in fact, if you think about it today, the management team, probably all of our organizations, really do not have the time to assess the business model for each particular unit. And the inability of top managers in extensively diverse companies to maintain control over their multi-business model over time typically will lead managers to base important resource allocation decisions on the most superficial analysis of each business unit's competitive advantage. Being in the ivory tower, so to speak, they are distanced from the day-to-day operations of the business units, and they may find that the business unit managers may try to hide information on poor performance from them in order to save their own jobs. And as organizational problems increase, top managers must spend an enormous amount of time and effort trying to solve these particular problems, which thereby increases the bureaucratic cost. Coordination among different business units was the second one. In this particular type of coordination is required to determine what value from a diversification strategy is based on, whether it's transferring, sharing, or leveraging competencies, which could be a major source of its bureaucratic cost. And the bureaucratic mechanisms needed to oversee and manage this type of coordination and handoffs between business units could also be a major source of costs. A second source of bureaucratic cost arises or potentially arises from the enormous amount of managerial time and effort required to accurately measure the performance of the unit profit contribution of each business unit as it goes about transferring or sharing resources is another one. So it's very costly when you think about bureaucratic costs when the senior management team in the ivory tower has to get hands-on involved. And this is a figure 10.4 on page 336, which is an example of this particular type of strategy. Although diversification can be highly profitable, can be a very good strategy to pursue, it's also the most complex and the most difficult to manage because it's based on a complex multi-business model. And even when a company has pursued this type of strategy successfully in the past, the ever-changing industrial market global environment that impacts the industry and inside a company may quickly reduce the profit creating advantages of that particular strategy, and they have to be on the constant alert to see what the ever-changing market conditions are to make necessary changes. And over on page 337, Pfizer's case, good read as it discusses its ability to recognize and reduce the bureaucratic cost in that particular case to drive this point home. So well worth your read. So how do we go about choosing this strategy? How do we go about choosing this strategy? This is related diversification compared to unrelated diversification. So the choice of strategy really depends upon what the benefits of each strategy against the bureaucratic cost of each strategy. Think about this related diversification. Related diversification talks about a company's core competencies, its distinctive advantages, its distinctive capabilities, those things that the company does in and out, day in and day out. It's not associated with one particular individual or one management team. It really becomes the processes, the procedures, the corporate culture, so to speak. And if you've ever read the book Good to Great by Jim Collins, it was a book that was published in 2001 where they went out and looked at and surveyed over 1,400 companies to see and followed those companies over a 40-year period, or researched those companies over a 40-year period to see what made them stand out. And what made them stand out, in essence, was their distinctive competencies. It was not a rock star CEO, but that the employees understood value creation, and they connected that dot of that value creation to what they did for that organization each and every day. But if you're going to pursue a related diversification, it pays a company to pursue a related diversification when these things exist. The company's competencies can be applied across a greater number of industries. The companies have a superior strategic capabilities that allow it to keep bureaucratic costs under close control. They may do this by encouraging entrepreneurship or developing a value-creating organizational culture. Now, compare that to unrelated diversification. And it pays a company to pursue unrelated diversification when each business unit's functional competencies have few useful applications across industries, but the company's top managers are skilled at raising the profitability of a poorly run business. The company's managers, number two, use their strategic competencies to improve the competitive advantage of their business units and keep bureaucratic costs under control. So unrelated diversification really relies heavily upon its management team, and we already have seen that when a management team leaves, then that may leave with them. Now, is that a bad strategy? Absolutely not. It depends on where the organization or the company is at within that organization, or within that industry, and a unrelated diversification could be the best strategy in the short term to ensure the survivability of that company. But the long term, Good to Great by Jim Collins, he typically led more to the related diversification strategy. But it depends on the capabilities where that organization is at within its industry. So if you get a chance, research Good to Great, very interesting. I'm sure you can find the quick version of that, but it's a very interesting study of these companies that really maintained its profitability over a 40-year time span. And at one time, GE was one of those. So here is an example 10.5 on page 339, looking at a corporate level strategy here. And then that corporate level strategy, again, is just an example that kind of summarizes this discussion we just had. So let's look at entering new industries with internal new ventures. Internal new venturing is typically used to implement corporate level strategies when a company possesses one or more distinctive competencies in a core business model, which they can leverage or recombine to enter a new industry. So internal new venturing is the process of transferring resources to and creating a new business unit or division within a new industry. And this term of internal venturing is often used by companies that have a business model based upon using their current technology or design skills to innovate new kinds of products and enter related markets or industries. So therefore, technology-based companies that typically will pursue a related diversification. In a company that also uses internal venturing to enter a newly emerging or embryonic industry is one in which no company has yet developed the competencies or business model to give them a dominant position in that particular industry. Over on page 342, 3 reasons that were identified as potential pitfalls to the high failure rate of internal ventures was associated with when they enter into a market on too small of a scale, poor commercialization of the new venture product, and poor corporate management of the new venture division was typically of the 3 major pitfalls that was discussed. So let's look at the first one, scale of entry, if we could. And this is just the example of figure 10.6 that goes to show you over time the profitability differences in a generalized format between a small scale and a large scale industry. So this particular photo shows that relationships between the scale of entry and the profitability over time. The figure shows that successful small scale entries associated with low initial cost, but in the long term, the large scale entry generates greater return. And because of the high cost and risk associated with this large scale entry, many companies will make the mistake of choosing a small scale entry strategy, which often means they fail to build the market share necessary for long-term success. Or in other words, they're going up against established entrants in this particular industry who already may have scale economies, brand loyalty, distribution channels. So I guess it's one of those go big or go home. If you're really interested in getting into that particular industry or market, this particular pitfall of a new venture, they go in too small. Another one's associated with commercialization. And as a result of commercializations, many new internal ventures are driven by the opportunity to use new or advanced technology to make their products better and hopefully outperform their competitors. But to be commercially successful, the products under development must be tailored to meet the needs of the customers. And many internal new ventures fail when a company ignores the needs of its customers in a market. And when they do that, they may fail because it's marketing a product based on technology for which there may not be any demand. And therefore, the company fails to correctly position itself or differentiate its product in the market to attract those new customers. And number 3, pitfall was dealing with poor implementation. And when they're managing new ventures and controlling the new ventures, that may create many difficult managerial and organizational problems. One common mistake some companies will make is to try to increase their chances of introducing successful products to establish too many different internal new venture divisions at the same time. So they're trying to do too much that exceeds their capabilities to effectively manage. Another common mistake is when corporate managers fail to do extensive advanced planning, which is necessary to ensure that the new venture's business model is sound. It contains all the elements that will be needed later if it is to succeed. And it also fails to anticipate the time and cost involved in the new venture process. So you have to make sure that when a company is looking at that, they have a very robust, sound business model and strategy to which to come back to. But equally important as part of that strategy, do you have the necessary skills, the resources, the management team, the commitment from the workers to ensure that that strategy will be successful? Okay, guidelines for successful internal new venture. We talked about some of the pitfalls and some of the ways to avoid some of these some of the ways to avoid these pitfalls. They should adopt a well thought out and structured approach to managing the new internal ventures. These new ventures may be based on research and development. It may be exploratory research is necessary to advance some basic or scientific technology, then developmental research to identify, develop, and perfect the commercial applications of the new technology. And when they do that, companies can take a number of steps to ensure good science ends up with good commercial and viable products. They may be working with their managers, maybe working hand in hand with its R&D scientists to continually develop and improve its business model. They may foster close links between research and development and marketing to increase their profitability in a new product in which they're offering. They may also offer close links between research and development and manufacturing to ensure that it has the abilities to make that new proposed product in a cost-effective and efficient manner, and they may choose to construct efficient scale manufacturing facilities, which give marketing a large budget to develop a future product campaign that will help build that market presence and brand loyalty quickly. Again, go in big or go home. But this is some of the guidelines that some companies can adopt to minimize pitfalls, thereby ensuring their success in a new venture. Let's talk about entering new industries from acquisitions over on page 345. Sometimes acquisitions are the main vehicle that companies may use to implement a horizontal integration strategy. And when they do that, they're pursuing that acquisition is typically pursued to use for vertical integration or diversification when a company lacks the distinctive competencies necessary to compete in a new industry. So it may have financial resources to purchase an established company that already has those competencies. And entering in such a new industry through internal venturing is a relatively slow process, yet acquisition is much quicker way for a company to establish a significant market presence. Acquisitions are often perceived as being less risky than internal new ventures because it involves less commercial uncertainty, because the risk of failures with internal new ventures, it's difficult to predict its future success and profitability. But if you're acquiring an existing company, you already have some historical data to which to look at to see how profitable or where the pitfalls are for making that acquisitions. Again, acquisitions are an attractive way to enter an industry that is certainly when it's protected by high barriers to entry. And when these entry barriers are high, it may be very difficult for a company to enter through an internal new venture because it already has to compete on a large scale. It's got to go construct those large scale manufacturing capabilities while investing in a massive advertising campaign But if you acquire a company that's already in that particular industry, who already have a market presence, who already have some manufacturing capabilities, who already have some distribution capabilities, your probability of success is going to be much higher. However, there are some pitfalls associated with acquisitions. Over on page 346, acquisitions have long been the most common method that companies will use to pursue diversification. However, there's 4 significant reasons why they fail. Number 1, companies frequently experience managerial problems when they attempt to integrate a different company. Think about 2 companies, it's 2 different cultures, 2 different styles of management and leadership, and trying to merge that into one. Number 2, companies often overestimate the potential economic benefits from an acquisition. Number 3, acquisitions tend to be so expensive that do not increase the future profitability. And number four, companies are often negligent in screening their acquisition targets, and they fail to recognize the important problems that may be existing within that particular company. Or they, not only that company, but they may overlook their own problems within their own business model. So integrating the acquired company, and they try to combine it with its own organizational structuring in culture. It really involved the adoption of common management and financial control systems. This joining together of operations from the acquired and the acquiring company, the establishment of bureaucratic mechanisms to which to share that information and personnel, and trying to create a common culture. After an acquisition, companies experience high management turnover because their employees do not like the acquired company's way of operating, its structure, or its culture. And in some cases, the loss of management talent and expertise and the damage from the constant tension between the businesses can harm the performance of the acquired company. So integrating that acquired company with 2 different cultures is going to be difficult. Let's look at number 2. Or overestimating the economic benefits. Sometimes managers will overestimate their competitive advantage that will derive from the acquisition, so they end up paying more for the acquired company than what it's worth. One reason that top managers may typically overestimate their own personal general competencies to create value through new products from an acquisition. They may find it that they have risen to the top of their company. It gives them an exaggerated sense of their own capabilities and self-importance, rock star CEO status, so to speak, that it may distort their strategic decision making. The number 3 pitfall, the expense of acquisitions. This is probably the most important reason for the failure of acquisitions, is that acquiring a company with stock that is publicly traded tends to be very expensive, and the expense of the acquisition can more than wipe out the value of the stream of future profits that are expected from the acquisition, especially when the top managers of a company that they're targeted for acquisition. They are likely to resist any takeover attempts unless the acquiring company agrees to pay a substantial premium of its current market value. And typically these premiums have often been 30 to 50% above the annual value, above the usual value of the company's stock. And the reasons why companies must pay such a high premium, that target price, is typically during the acquisition process. Investors will try to speculate on the final price the acquiring company will pay to capture it. Therefore, the stock prices will escalate, and in order for that acquiring company to still be in competition to acquire that company, they have to raise their offerings associated with that. Number 4 pitfall deals with the inadequate pre-acquisition screening. it will be a strain if they don't do this correctly. But from a screening perspective, is that they don't thoroughly analyze the potential benefits and costs. In many cases, that what they thought they were buying a well-managed company didn't turn out to be that. What they thought was a good balance sheet was not as good. The assets was not as up to date as they thought. The skills that they thought that they were buying is or was not at the level they had anticipated. So pre-acquisition screening is probably the most difficult thing they'll have to do, and the one that's going to be very time consuming, but is equally one of the most important things to ensure that the company that they're acquiring is the company that's going to add value to the overall corporation. So some of the guidelines for this successful acquisition is these four main steps that we see here: target identification, pre-acquisition screening, bidding strategy, integration, and learning from experience. So let's look at each one of these very briefly. Through this pre-acquisition screening, it certainly increases a company's knowledge about a potential takeover target and lessens the risk of purchasing a new company. But it also, looking at this, there's typically several potential acquisition targets that a company has got to use to, they set the criteria and they're focusing on an acquisition. Several of those criteria include its company's financial positions, its distinctive competencies and competitive advantages, what's the changing industry boundaries, its management capabilities, its corporate cultures. And once a company has a list of the potential acquisition candidates, the most favored ones they're looking for, they certainly can go out and hire third parties like investment bankers who uses business models to provide valuable insights about the attractiveness of a potential acquisition and accessing current industry competitive advantages, as well as many other issues surrounding the acquisitions. So, and they're doing that to hopefully to select the optimum bidding strategy for acquiring the target company's stock, while keeping the purchase price as low as they possibly can. And it certainly offers a third-party view from an outsider who has no vested interest whether the company acquires or not, to give you that unfiltered view to make sure that the organization is making a good decision for the overall benefit of the organization. Or another way could be a reason to kind of take a rock star CEO and keep him in check. So let's look at the bidding strategy, page 349. The essence of a bidding strategy is to reduce the price that a company must pay for its target company. And they can acquire that through a friendly takeover bid where the two companies come together and they decide on an amicable way to merge the two companies, satisfy the needs of each company's stockholders and top managers. And a friendly takeover typically will prevent speculators from bidding up stock prices. On the other hand, by contrast, if they do a hostile bidding takeover, the price of that target company often goes up as speculators who expect that the offer price will be raised by the acquirer or another company that may have a higher counter offer. And this is an essential element of a good bidding strategy, is also timing. With good timing, a company can make a bargain purchase. This is another probably good reason why having an outside expert third party to aid in this process would be paramount. Integration. Despite good screening and bidding, the acquisition will fail unless the acquiring company possesses the essential organizational design skills to integrate, manage the acquired company, and to manage its operations to develop a viable multi-business model. This type of integration should be the source of the potential strategic advantages of the acquisition, but also involves they want to make sure that they eliminate any duplication of facilities or functions, and divest itself of any unwanted business units. So anytime you're doing an acquisition, when you have overlapping functions and capabilities, one of the goals of acquisitions to minimize lower cost to ensure long-term profitability is to eliminate those overlaps. And number 4, learning from experience. Research suggests that companies acquire many companies over time. They become expert in this process and can generate significant value from their experience of this acquisition process. And they use this experience to develop a playbook, so to speak, or a plan to which they can follow to execute an acquisition in the most efficiently and effective manner. So in a way, one way to grow a market share is through acquisition, but you want to make sure it's done correctly. Let's look over on page 349 as we wrap up this particular chapter with reference to joint ventures. And we know that a joint venture is when 2 or more companies agree to pool their resources to create a new business, or they enter into embryonic or growth industry. So it's really about taking what the companies share as complementary skills or distinct competencies, and they use those skills or competencies from a joint venture to ensure the joint venture success. And usually they want to make sure that both parties benefit. But if you're not very careful, there's going to be some problems associated with a joint venture. Even though a joint venture allows a company to share cost of developing a new business, it also requires that they share in those profits if it succeeds. The joint venture partners may have different business models or different time horizons and different problems that may arise that soon boil over into conflict about how to run the joint venture, and these kind of problems can really disintegrate a business and result in failure. Another one's associated with, if a company enters into a joint venture, the risk of giving away important company-specific knowledge to its partner, who may then use that new knowledge to compete with its partner in the future. So there's risk associated with joint ventures as well. Restructuring is another way over on page 350. Sometimes companies just simply need to exit industries to increase their profitability or split their existing business into separate independent companies. Restructuring is that process of reorganization and divesting business units in existing industries to refocus upon a company's core business and rebuild its distinctive competencies. So if a company was using a diversification strategy, they think they had capabilities, competencies that could transcend against different industries, and they realized that it was not at the what they had hoped to do, so they could come back to their core business function. I know of a utility who at one time, electrical generation utility, who wanted to diversify. They wanted to not only be in the generation capabilities industry or the generation capability of electricity, but they wanted to be in the HVAC and communications industry as well. Well, we had a CEO who wanted to diversify the company, or that company had a CEO who wanted to diversify the company, moved that particular industry over into those new markets, and soon realized after about 2 to 3 years that the distinctive competencies that the electrical generation company owned was just that, running power plants and producing electricity. So they finally had to restructure the company and back away from that HVAC company as well as communications company and come back to its core business model, which was producing electricity. Why do some companies want to restructure? One main reason is that they want to grow their market share. They want to grow their stock value. So they want to have a diversification in their stock. And when they have diversification of their stock, then they become more attractive to investors. And stock is a way in which a company will sell part of its assets in order to raise new capital, to invest into new ventures, or upgrade their existing competencies. However, when investors see highly divested companies are less attracted to investments for four reasons. And one of those is that investors often may feel that companies no longer have multi-business models that justify their participation in many different industries. Number two, the complexity of the financial statements of highly diversified enterprises disguises the performance of its individual business units. Number three, savvy investors have learned from experience that managers often have a tendency to pursue too much diversification, or they do it for the wrong reasons in their attempts to reduce profitability. And number four, innovations in strategic management have sometimes diminished the advantages of vertical integration or diversification. So with that concludes this last chapter of our Business 670 course. And again, thank you so much for listening.